Ever since the release of formations and armaments, I really thought we had hit rock bottom in Rise of Kingdoms. In my mind, I was like, there is no way on this whole entire Earth Lilith could make an update even remotely near as bad as this one. Nothing as an obvious cash grab scheme, but to be honest, congratulations to Lilith, you have surpassed my expectations with flying colors. It was amazing to see the ridiculousness of upgrading equipment and what they implemented into the game. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss the worst update Lilith has ever made to Rise of Kingdoms. So if you want to know all about the new update, you want to know about the equipment, why the whole thing sucks, and the only positive about it, you can stick around till the end of the video. Now let's begin today's video by discussing the equipment system and why I think it's bad. And to do this, I'm going to go over 5 main points, and we'll just start off with the first one. And the first one is the cost to stat ratio, especially for a lower spender free-to-play, is abysmal. The amount of stuff you have to pay to get such low amounts of stats as a free-to-play is ridiculous. And we'll start off with the first issue with the pieces of equipment, and this is up until tier 5, the stats are pretty much useless. Like 1% of stats between your whole set of equipment is 8% of stats, and then the extra all damage, it's like 8% of all damage. So between your whole set of equipment, it's around 16% of stats. And then the only time the stats really become important is when you reach tier 5. When you reach this maximum level for the piece of equipment, they gain a thing pretty much whenever they're launching basic attacks for every single thing to deal extra damage, or increase their march speed, or take less damage, and this is where the biggest stats come in, sometimes in the realm of around 50 to 60% for a whole set of equipment. So the tier 5 level is where you're like, alright, now the stats are really picking up, now it's getting pretty insane, and that's where you would expect to pay the biggest cost, especially the blueprints, because Lilith said blueprints would be inside of the cost, and we expected that to be a thing, and I wasn't objected to it. Looking at blueprints, some players who've got full crit talent sets and all that, they look at blueprints and like they're kinda useless, so having an extra blueprint or two within the full upgrade set would have made some sense, but here's the blueprint upgrade cost if you want to max a full set, alright? So for the initial unlock, you're spending 8 blueprints to craft the actual piece of equipment, and then to reach tier 5 from there, it's 4 blueprints per piece. So what are you looking at in terms of stat costs? Well, you're going to be paying around 32 more blueprints to max your full equipment set. That is 40 blueprints total. Now, that sounds like a ridiculous number, and it absolutely is, but to add insult to injury is how difficult it is to access most of these blueprints. Accessing blueprints for unique weapon sets, like Archer full sets of equipment here, or accessing blueprints for something like the Ring of Doom or Horn of Fury, take a lot of time or a lot of money, or more specifically, a lot of gems. And if you were to max out like a full set here, or 40 blueprints, get it from level 0 to level 5, here is your pure gem cost for pretty much just a max set. And to do this math, I really just did what I noticed when I was getting my equipment sets. If I wanted to buy a new blueprint pretty much from scratch, it was around 20,000 gems, sometimes more, sometimes less, or about 6 months worth of grinding out materials and blueprints. So what are we looking at in terms of blueprint cost? Well, you've got around 800,000 gems for a full set of equipment, or somewhere in the realm of 20 years. Which one sounds more appealing? None of them, they all suck. So just the initial blueprint cost of the equipment is ridiculous, and the reason this is the case is because Lilith is making you pay a blueprint per level, something I didn't expect, something I didn't predict. I said that Lilith would make a blueprint maybe for tier 5, maybe as an initial cost to enter, like into the upgrade system, but no, every single level needs a blueprint. So you're gonna need to pay a blueprint for 1% archer health. You need to pay a blueprint for 500 capacity, a blueprint for all damage until you pay another blueprint to reach the final level with all the good stuff in it, the actual amazing stats that actually make a difference. So for a free-to-play low spender, the upgrade cost per level is insane just on blueprints. And another thing to add insult to injury is because all the good stats are at the end, you'll need to spend somewhere in the realm of around 80,000 gems per piece after you've already crafted it to access the new and important stuff, and that's negating all the material costs and the gold costs. So that's the first issue. All the good stats are at the end, which is a ridiculous cost to reach. The next issue is the material cost. I mean, the blueprints are one. Obviously, blueprints are arguably more difficult to access than materials because you can get materials for free much easier, but the material cost to reach tier 5 is next level. For a piece of equipment that is a weapon or an accessory, it's in the realm of 255 materials per piece, 255 to reach the tier 5 level. And if you were to do across a whole set, it's somewhere in the realm, I don't know the exact numbers here because I don't actually have them on hand, but it's in the realm of 1,600 to 1,800 legendary materials per 8 set piece of equipment to reach the final end goal on every single one. And I can say confidently, if we look between my whole account and all the materials I have, I don't think I've even had in total 1,800 legendary materials, and I don't think I ever will have that many materials, and if I do, it's going to be like 3 years down the line. So to reach one max set of equipment, you're paying around 800,000 gems, and then a ridiculous amount of materials, and you can't really buy materials. They just either come with the blueprints inside specific events, or they come in the daily, like the daily pretty much objectives. A few bundles give you materials, which are expensive and are definitely whale bundles only, and then you can make the materials in the blacksmith. Those are really the main ways to get the materials if we negate all the really low value stuff. So materials are definitely still difficult to acquire. Yes, you get them in higher numbers, but it costs way more to max a set of equipment in materials than it does in blueprints. So right now, just as the initial cost to get equipment up to tier 5, the good level, it's going to take probably around 1,700 legendary materials for a full set, around 40 legendary blueprints, or 32 if you already have it crafted, to just get the full set of tier 5, which when you convert it to like gems is around somewhere in the realm of 800,000 gems, with all the legendary materials, which cost probably in the realm of another 100 to 300,000 gems, with also extra grinding time on top of that. So equipment upgrading sets to tier 5 is extremely unrealistic for a free-to-play low spender, and usually that doesn't matter. Usually with Lilith and they add stuff that's unrealistic for low spenders, it's not too impactful, and usually they can access within 75 to 90% of the value by just upgrading to tier 2, 3, or 4. But guess what? You can't do that with these pieces of equipment because the only good stuff is at tier 5. So what does that mean? Well, you can't just go halfway, or you can't even go 3/4 of the way. It's not like with commanders, where for Henry, for example, I could go 5-5-1-5, and I've got like 85% of his value. The last 15% is in his expertise, and to reach his expertise, it's the highest cost. That's when it gets the most expensive. But no, as a free-to-play low spender, 90% of the value is pretty much inside of the, let's say, expertise of the equipment here. So as A, the materials become more expensive per level, and B, you have to pay all the blueprints to reach there, you finally get the end goal, which is the best thing, but it's not achievable for a free-to-play low spender. It's ridiculously expensive, and you're not getting any value from the equipment upgrades. There is almost no point in getting any of these upgrades unless you're going for the tier 5 here. Even then, you probably want to get the tier 5 within a short period of time after getting tier 2 or even tier 4, because that's where you get the real stuff. You want to get tier 5 to get the 5% counter attack damage. You want to reach tier 5 on the Ring of Doom to get the extra normal damage and taking less normal damage, or dealing more skill damage and taking less skill damage. All of the good stuff in these pieces of equipment is the final tier, so there's no real value for reaching somewhere like in the middle. There's no middle ground. There's no special stat you gain in the middle besides really mediocre, very, very minuscule amounts of stats that, yes, kind of add up when you make a full set of equipment, but 8% of stats on the open field for in the realm of like 200,000 gems is not worth it. And then if you want to go to the all damage, it's definitely not worth it. You're paying ridiculous amounts of gems and materials. So for a free-to-play low spender, just off the bat, the first big issue is none of the stats are really worth it until you reach the end. So overall, for a free-to-play low spender, the first and second big issues are that the stats are not worth it, and then the cost to reach the end is ridiculous. So the only good stats are very expensive and extremely unrealistic to reach. Now, the third major issue with all the equipment updates is something that would have made it a little bit more bearable, and this was my prediction that Lilith would add a few more ways as a free-to-play low spender, or even a whale, to access extra blueprints. But currently, there are no new ways, and the last time we saw any major change to how you access blueprints was really through the Alliance Mobilization event. When you look at the Alliance Mobilization, you can get like 9 or so fragments when you reach the end tier, I think around 15, so you'll get around a full chestplate every 2 months, which is okay, but honestly, how many years is that going to take to reach a full maxed iconic set? A ridiculous amount. So when we look at all of these things, with all the costs that have been added, Lilith hasn't really changed the amount of materials and blueprints coming to the game. And if obviously a lot of blueprints are being added, and a lot of players are getting blueprints, and it's like a lot of other mobile games, as the economy develops more, obviously things go up in price, it costs more to buy things, but Lilith hasn't added anything to the economy besides that one event, and that event started like 6 or so months ago, so you would have expected they add a new event, they add maybe an extra production slot, or they change the materials you get here to 20 or even 25. But nope, that hasn't changed. There's no new bundles in the shop for whales either. That also really hasn't changed. So when we look at all of this stuff and they've added all these ridiculous costs, it hasn't changed anything. Nothing else has changed inside of the shop, nothing inside the material production. Everything has stayed the same. There is just crazy costs that have been added that will take even a whale years upon years to reach the end goals. So there's the third issue. There's nothing in the economy to justify this extra cost to the game. There's nothing that's like, alright, well, a lot of players have a ton of blueprints in stash. Even look at a channel like, let's say, Chiskel, who has full sets of talented equipment, but he spent thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars on the game. He's been playing the game for years on end, and he still doesn't have every single piece he owns fully talented. And imagine an account like his, which is a whale account, that doesn't even have enough blueprints to max out a set right now, not even close to enough. So we look at all these things, and it's quite obvious that this doesn't really make sense for the current state of the game. I mean, if the A, costs were even lower, or B, they added more ways to get blueprints, I could almost justify it. I'd be like, alright, it kind of makes sense. There's tons and tons of blueprints in the economy right now. I never ever see anyone like, I care about the blueprint events, but I swear every second time I'm on YouTube, I see someone that's going for Holy Knight's treasure, or there's people doing dig event, or my whole kingdom will go crazy, and there's just tons of bundles for dig event popping up in our, like, basically alliance store. So people still need blueprints. It's super obvious. So why on earth are they making the blueprint cost insane? And obviously materials are still important. I don't think there's a single player out there with hundreds upon hundreds of legendary materials just sitting there who's like, oh yeah, I'm just chilling right now. I've got literally thousands of dollars worth of legendary materials. I don't need those things anyways. Everybody is fighting to get legendary materials. It is just the thing right now. And then adding another basically place to spend them doesn't really help the economy at all. It really just makes it much more difficult to do. So that's the third issue. Nothing has changed in the game, and the cost is just ridiculous to go with it. Now, the fourth issue that this really brings into the game is it restricts the number of marches you could run, especially as a free-to-play low spender, and even as a whale, because what is the backbone of every march? Well, you could say the commanders, but I think they're the face of the march. They're usually the strongest thing, but what really helps commanders, it's your equipment and I guess your formations and armaments, but more, it is your equipment sets. And as a free-to-play low spender, what's usually your goal if you want to become a very powerful, formidable force on the open field who doesn't have to play for literally hours upon hours on end? Well, it is make 5 or so marches, make 4 marches even making 3 marches, but with the new crazy cost to max equipment, if this is the new meta and a lot of players go in for it, you can't really justify running 5 marches because that 5th march is probably going to be running epic equipment, and that epic equipment isn't going to have any of these tiers. It's not going to have any of the set bonuses legendary gear has. It's not going to have the iconic alone. It's not going to have anything like the special talent that it gets. None of that stuff is really going to affect epic equipment. So you look at legendary gear, it's obviously becoming the meta. A lot of players are starting to try and make as much as possible, myself included. I'm trying to finish off a second and possibly a third set for the future, but I can't really justify running a 3rd march right now because I look at all my equipment pieces and I look at the epic stats, and now compared to the legendary stats, it's super far behind. It's not even close. And legendary gear used to be a good way to get 10-20% extra value compared to another player, but they could still run epic gear and justify it. But if you wanted to run 3 marches right now, epic gear is just not a thing you can really do. If you want to become within the meta, once all this tier 5 stuff becomes really meta and the whales really start to access it, free-to-play low spenders can't access it. So a 3rd march, a 4th march, a 5th march, even a 6th march is just insanely impossible to reach, even for a whale right now. What is the point of running 6 marches when you're going to have 1 march that's insanely powerful, and then your 6th isn't going to have fully talented gear? It's not going to have all these extreme extra stats on it, and you can't reach tier 5 on 6 marches. It's an absurd amount of cost, and only the blubberiest of whales will ever reach that tier. So we look at the game right now, and Lilith is really pushing you away from running multiple marches, which is the fun thing. The fun thing I can say confidently is when I run around on the open field with a 5-march murder ball. It's usually an Arc of Osiris because my 5-march murder ball sucks, but I'm running around and I'm just smashing players. Even though my trades might be bad in Arc, it doesn't matter. But you obviously want to get good trades on the open field, smashing players with 5 marches, and that is the real satisfying thing about the game. It's that unrestricted open field movement with such a large group of commanders that just converge on one target and demolish it. I can say it's probably the most satisfying thing I see, but if you want to run 5 marches on the open field right now, it's extremely unreasonable. If you want to have the top tier equipment, if you want to be able to get good trades against 90% of players, especially if they are doing the meta strategy of running less marches, your trades are just going to be worse. It's just as simple as that, because A, Lilith is releasing commanders really quick, and obviously that was the first issue, but now B, to add on top of it, equipment costs are pretty much just as annoying as getting commanders, and they're not even a secondary focus anymore. It's almost become the primary thing you need to focus on if you want to run 5 marches, having really good equipment that can almost keep up with the meta, and then again, you're not going to reach tier 5 on 5 sets. It's almost impossible. So that's the fourth issue. It really does restrict the amount of marches you can run, and obviously that really hurts the fun in the game, because I can say, like I said, it is really fun to use 5 marches, and also fairly efficient. If you want to get kills quickly and fight in KVK a lot, you need 5 marches. If you aren't running 5, it's going to take you a while. Like, if I want to reach 30 million kills with 2 marches I'm running right now, it's probably going to take me like days on end worth of fighting. But if you want to get them quickly, you need more marches, but you can't run more marches unless you have better equipment, which is really difficult to get nowadays. Now, the final major issue involved with all of this equipment and all these upgrades and stuff is that new players get hit the hardest. Out of everyone in the game, who gets strung and slapped the hardest out of this whole update? Well, it's the new players to Rise of Kingdoms, and it's a really, really simple reason, and that is blueprints and materials still take time to get. Even as a whale player, they're gonna take time, and as a free-to-play low spender especially, you have a bigger advantage on your account the older it is, and compared to a new player, you're going to be at a massive advantage in terms of just base raw equipment level. If you have a legendary set of equipment right now, you already have an advantage over just about every single new player to the game. And if you have a tier 5 set of equipment, which yes is still almost within the realm of achievable for a free-to-play player, not really, but almost there, you're at an extreme advantage compared to a new player. And a new player getting into the game, let's think about what you get. Well, first you have to make the full epic set of equipment, because no one's going to get a full legendary set in KVK 1. Then you have to make the full legendary set, then you have to iconic it, then you have to max it out fully with all the tier 5s, and then you'll be at the level of most players in the end game once that basically passes on. And as time goes on, that gap is only going to widen between those new players and those older players who have the much better equipment, because it's already an issue right now with normal legendary equipment. New players just can't keep up with it, but compared to the older players who've stashed up materials like myself, I can guarantee no new account day 1 could get this amount of materials I have in my inventory right now from like a month worth of saving. And that is just crazy to think that an account could do that. It's just not possible. So when we look at the materials an account like mine has that I've grinded up over maybe like 2 to 3, 4 months, and you think a new player just couldn't get this, and 8 iconic crystals is super unachievable for a new player. So these things take time, and what's going to affect them the most? Well, it's going to be waiting for all of this equipment, waiting for all this stuff that they need to get. So in the end of the day, the thing that keeps Rise of Kingdoms alive the most is the player base. Keeping people playing, keeping new players coming in, so if people do stop playing, you still got the new, fresh meat to play the game and enjoy the game as well, but you can't really enjoy the game if you can't keep up with those endgame players. And Lilith can make whole new different sections of the game for just new players, but then that just kind of splits the community, and if one section dies, it dies, the whole thing goes down with it, and it becomes really unenjoyable. So that's why KVKs are fun. There's tons of players from across the world, tons of kingdoms, all fighting to win, but then you think about all the new players in the new kingdoms, they're always at a disadvantage, and chuck this on top, it's just widening that gap. And the thing with equipment is you can't really add extra to the game. I mean, you could give them extra blueprints and legendary materials, but how are you going to make up for a 3-year-old account having extra blueprints and materials compared to an account that's 100 days old? It's almost impossible to do unless Lilith is like, we're just going to send you 2,000 legendary materials just right off the bat. Here you go, mate, just take them. That's not going to happen. So the gap between free-to-plays and low spenders, especially at the newer level compared to the OG players, is just becoming worse and worse, and it's going to become pretty much an absolute joke as time continues to go on and more players do eventually upgrade this equipment set, even if it's whales or low spenders. You may be also wondering, why do I care so much about equipment, especially with newer players? Because you could say the same thing with commanders. Newer players don't have the same commanders as endgame players, but the thing is, with endgame commanders, a new player can save up and max that commander out. They can finish that commander off. Like, if you were a brand new player to the game and you played properly and you did all the grinding and you knew what you were doing, which obviously most players don't when they first begin, but let's say you did, you would be able to, by the time you reach Season 3 and by the time you hit full-fledged Season of Conquest against accounts like mine, you'd be able to expertise the meta march. I could guarantee right now if I made a new account and I started saving from this point onwards and I became really sweaty on that account, I could set myself up to have like 2 full marches of the brand new meta commanders, whether it be Herman and Zuge or some new cavalry commanders or Lao Che. You could have them expertise, and that's because commanders are much more temporary than equipment. We look at these commanders, it's like they have a really, really set end goal, and yes, it takes time to reach that end goal, but it's a very achievable end goal. But with the equipment system, the thing that makes it much more dangerous, especially with newer players, is the fact that it's basically infinite. If we're being literal right now, 40 blueprints and thousands of legendary materials is pretty much an infinite cost. And as players go on, they're going to get closer to that infinity and they're going to actually get stronger. Because yes, obviously, new players can still make legendary equipment, but they won't be able to get it as fast. They won't be able to rank it up as fast. They won't get iconic crystals as fast. There's no way to get extra of those. You either have to spend tons of money or play the game and hope that there's a ton of new players who come in after you who are at the same disadvantage that you were at. So you look at all this equipment and it's much more permanent. That's the real issue, because commanders, yes, they're extremely permanent and yes, they're strong, but they're not as permanent as equipment, because you can say, I think any account you ask, what did your meta build look like 2-3 years ago? What does it look like now? What did your equipment look like 2-3 years ago? What does it look like now? And I can assure you, the meta build 2-3 years ago is very different, especially for a whale player, let's say, than the equipment they're running now, because the equipment is probably the same, with a few iconics and a few extra special talents. That's just the realistic part of it. So a new account has to work their way towards this infinite goal that's almost unreachable, to give themselves a slight advantage on the open field, while the older accounts have been working on it for longer and already have been getting closer to that infinite goal. But with commanders, there's a very, very finite amount of time before you max them, and as you work on, they become stronger and stronger, and they don't need the expertise necessarily. So commanders in comparison to equipment for newer players are very different, and that's why equipment is so much more important and much more game changing for a newer player rather than commanders, because a newer player is not forced to upgrade a commander like Artemisia, whereas with equipment, you're forced to get the same thing as everyone else. So you don't even have that advantage over the older players who have different commanders, because most new players wouldn't get Cyrus, they would probably go and get Zulang, but I didn't have that advantage, he wasn't in the game. So a newer player has the advantage to get Zulang over Cyrus, and they can catch up to me in the regard of commanders. But in terms of equipment, I don't think it'd be very possible for new accounts spending no money to actually catch up to my equipment unless they really focused in on it. So there's the real issue between equipment and newer players. The gap will just continue to widen and it will pretty much never end. So now that we've discussed all 5 points, the 5 negative things I believe that the update was really doing, what is the one positive thing I mentioned at the start of today's video? Because surely Lilith added this into the game for a reason. Surely there was one upside, and I can confirm there is one thing that is really, really good about the update, and in very simple terms, Lilith makes a ton of money. Now, if you enjoyed today's video or you just found my brutally honest opinion interesting compared to the other opinions out there, and also my unsponsored opinion, by the way, consider subscribing to the channel, because I'm going to always say what I believe. Whether it means I get kicked off the game, I don't really care. So subscribe to the channel, your support is appreciated, and it helps videos like these reach more players and actually make an impact. So now I just want to say thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.